We lost more than just flavor when we stopped eating Native American recipes. We lost centuries of wisdom, survival knowledge, and soul. But what treasures did we forget when we turned our backs on the original American kitchen? Stick around. Some of these dishes might just change how you see food forever. Three Sisters Stew. When people talk about indigenous recipes, they often miss just how much wisdom is baked into the basics. Take Three Sisters Stew, for instance. It's not just a dish, it's a tradition passed down for hundreds of years. Built on the sacred harmony of corn, beans, and squash, these three crops were grown together, fed each other, and in turn fed entire communities. This stew, thick and nourishing, combines beans, corn, and winter squash, collectively known as the Three Sisters. Through indigenous farming, these three plants supported and nourished each other, thriving as they grew together. The corn adds body, the beans bring protein, and the squash delivers flavor and fiber all in one. What makes this dish truly special is the balance, the kind that modern nutritionists are still trying to figure out. It's earthy, sweet, and filled with everything your body needs. This was the type of meal made in the hardest months of winter and the most thankful days of fall. It tasted like home, whether your home was a tent, a cabin, or a cliffside. Now, if that stew's got you feeling grounded, just wait until we talk about a certain smoky blue porridge that practically tastes like the desert itself. Blue corn mush. Blue corn mush was never something you could buy in a box. You made it, you learned it, you passed it on. And if you were part of a Pueblo community in New Mexico, you probably grew up thinking it was the only breakfast that ever mattered. Growing up, one thing many Navajo people looked forward to each fall was getting blue corn mush while waiting for the Northern Navajo Nation Fair Parade. Similar to cream of wheat and oatmeal, this hot porridge can be eaten sweet or savory, but this isn't your ordinary breakfast cereal. 1 gram of juniper ash, a key ingredient in blue corn mush, contains about as much calcium as a glass of milk. When added to the blue cornmeal, this ash initiates nixtamalization, breaking down the corn's outer shell and enhancing both flavor and nutritional value. The cornmeal used here isn't just any corn. It's stone-ground blue corn mixed with juniper ash to unlock nutrients and add a mineral kick most people wouldn't even recognize. It's smoky, nutty, and surprisingly filling. This was a dish that kept generations of farmers, shepherds, and builders going from sunrise to moonlight. You didn't have time for eggs Benedict or sugar-coated cereals. When your entire day was labor, you needed something honest and hot. And blue corn mush brought that in spades. If you ever had it cold the next morning, even better. The desert air made it denser, firmer, almost like a cake. But if you think that's the peak of morning comfort, wait till you unwrap what comes next. Cherokee bean bread. Cherokee bean bread is one of those foods that makes you feel like you're part of something older. You start with cornmeal and mashed beans, nothing fancy, and wrap that mix tightly in corn husks or sometimes leaves. Then steam it until it's soft and dense like a tamale's cousin. The best part? It only used what was already in the pantry. There was no need for sugar, yeast, or anything imported. This was made by hand, often with a fire pit outside and the whole family pitching in. It was the kind of thing you brought to a community meal where everyone knew whose bean bread was whose. It was modest, but when done right, it had this deep, earthy flavor that didn't need any butter or spread to feel complete. You'd eat it hot, straight from the husk, steam still clinging to your fingers. There was no such thing as leftovers. And just like that, a humble bundle of corn and beans told the story of generations. But if you thought this was a warm hug of a dish, the next recipe is like a full-on wool blanket in the middle of winter. Navajo mutton stew. There's something about Navajo mutton stew that makes time slow down. Maybe it's the way it simmers for hours, or how the hommony swells up in the broth, soaking in every bit of flavor from the lamb, the onions, and the dried chilies. The Navajo people have been making this dish for longer than most cities have had streetlights, and they make it count. Mutton, if you haven't had it, is deeper than your regular lamb. It's gamey in the best way, bold, and rich. And when paired with the chewy texture of Hommony corn that has been nixtamalized for both nutrition and texture, you get something that feels substantial. You don't just eat this stew, you sit with it. You respect it. It feeds not just the body, but the memory of sheep herding on sunburnt mesas and cooking under stars brighter than anything electric. It's no frills, just flavor. You tear up some flatbread, scoop it up, and hope it never runs out. But if this was the heart of the desert, then what comes next is pure forest and lake, wild rice and maple, sweetened by the north winds. Ojibwe wild rice and maple chicken. Some dishes sing like a lullaby, and Ojibwe wild rice and maple chicken is one of them. You can practically hear the wind in the pine trees when it hits your tongue. This dish comes from the Great Lakes region and feels like a love letter to the woods. Wild rice, which isn't even technically rice but an aquatic grass, was hand-harvested from canoes with care and tradition. It pops in your mouth when cooked right, nutty and earthy with a kind of chew you don't forget. Now pair that with chicken that has been glazed in maple syrup, real maple syrup, not the kind that comes in plastic jugs, and roasted until the skin is crisp and the flavor caramelizes into something magical. The result is a plate that feels rustic and elegant at the same time. It's not just dinner, it's an experience, a forest hike, a family feast, a fireside story. This one is sweet, savory, and deeply spiritual. And while that might have your cravings leaning sweet, what comes next is gonna hit your taste buds like a thunderclap. Bison chili with choke cherry sauce. Bison chili with the bold bite of wild fruit. Now that's something to talk about. Buffalo chili with choke cherry sauce is one of those meals that grabs you by the collar and says, sit down, you're not going anywhere. It's rich, hearty, and absolutely unforgettable. You start with bison, leaner than beef, with a deeper flavor that comes from roaming open plains, not feedlots. Add beans, roasted peppers, maybe even a hint of smoked paprika if you want to modernize it just a little. But the real magic comes from the choke cherry sauce. These wild little berries pack a punch, tart, slightly bitter, and perfectly balanced. When you add a touch of honey or maple syrup, they were a staple for many plains tribes and used in everything from pemmican to puddings. In this chili, they swirl into the broth like a sweet tart lightning bolt, cutting through the meatiness and elevating the entire dish. It's bold, it's ancestral, and it's delicious. This was the kind of meal shared at powwows and celebrations, hearty enough for warriors and warm enough for winter nights. But if this is a celebration of fire and depth, then next we're digging into something quiet and ancient. Bread made from oak trees. Acorn bread. Believe it or not, acorn bread is something that shouldn't work, but absolutely does. Picture the oak tree you walk past on your way to work. Now imagine turning those fallen acorns into a nutty, rich loaf of bread that has been baked the same way for thousands of years. California tribes, especially the Maidu and Pomo, knew exactly how to make this magic happen. First, you gather and shell the acorns, then leach them with water, sometimes in baskets left by stream beds for days, to remove the bitter tannins. What you're left with is a soft, fragrant flour that's packed with protein and flavor. You mix it with water, sometimes a touch of honey or berries if you had them, then bake it in clay ovens or under hot coals. The result is earthy, dense, and just sweet enough to make you close your eyes for a second. It's a humble bread with a proud history, one that connects directly to the land it came from. You wouldn't find this on a grocery shelf. You had to earn it. And if you thought this was rustic cooking at its finest, the next dish is pure theater. Salmon cooked with fire, smoke, and a little bit of magic. Cedar-plank salmon. Salmon on cedar planks is not just a cooking method, it's a performance. This is how the tribes of the Pacific Northwest honored both the fish and the fire. You take a fresh-caught salmon, split and cleaned, and pin it to a cedar board with wooden skewers. Then you lean the board close to an open Flame, close enough for the smoke to kiss it, but not so close that it burns. What happens next is slow alchemy. The oils from the cedar seep into the salmon, blending with the fish's natural richness and creating a flavor so bold and so smoky it doesn't need seasoning at all. This dish was cooked outdoors beside rivers, surrounded by canoes and laughter. People would gather around the fire, not just for food, but for stories, for connection. When you take your first bite, you taste the water, the wood, and the flame all in one. It's elegance dressed up as campfire food. But if that was smoke and sizzle, next we're moving to something softer, something that tastes like a grandmother's whisper. Wajapi berry sauce. Let me introduce you to a berry sauce so good it makes jam feel like an afterthought. Wajapi is not just a sauce, it's a revelation. Made from choke cherries, June berries, or even wild blueberries if you had them. This thick, sweet tart dish is a staple among the Lakota and Dakota Sioux, but it's not spread thin like jam. This is served warm and ladled generously over fried bread, roasted meats, or even eaten by the spoonful. Traditionally, it was made by slowly simmering down berries with water until they broke down and thickened naturally, sweetened with just a touch of honey or maple syrup. No gelatin, no preservatives, just patience. The result? A deep, velvety berry flavor that clings to the tongue and lingers in the memory. Wajapi is the kind of thing you make in a big pot on the stove while kids are running around and elders are telling stories from the old days. It's not fancy, it's not fast, but it's unforgettable. Speaking of pairing, you'll want to stick around for the next one. It's a Southern comfort classic, but with a tribal twist that brings new life to breakfast. Creek Hommony grits with smoked turkey. Hommony grits are already a comfort food in the South, but Creek Hommony grits with smoked turkey? That's a whole new level. Forget your standard diner version. This one is creamy, smoky, and full of intention. The Creek people made their grits from dried corn soaked in an alkaline solution, a process called nixtamalization, which broke down the hull and unlocked all the good nutrients hiding inside. What you end up with is something way hardier than instant grits. It's got texture, it's got history. Now fold in chunks of smoked turkey, leftovers from a roast, or cured just enough to hold that fire-kissed flavor, and the whole thing comes alive. The turkey brings salt and depth, the grits bring body and warmth. This was food made for early mornings and long days ahead. And if you thought that was an artful bowl of porridge, wait until you see what the Hopi people have been doing with cornmeal for centuries. Something so thin and delicate, it's basically a miracle on a hot stone. Hopi Piki bread. Hopi Piki bread might be the most delicate piece of cooking you'll ever witness. This is not your average flatbread. It's whisper-thin, paper-light, and made from blue cornmeal mixed with water and a touch of ash. But here's the catch. There's no pan, no oven, and no room for error. The batter is hand-smoothed in a single stroke across a burning hot stone, and within seconds it sets. You peel it off like parchment. It's soft but strong, flexible like rice paper, and every sheet is layered with care. For the Hopi people, making Piki is a rite of passage, a skill taught slowly over years and passed from mother to daughter, generation to generation. It's food you handle with reverence, not just because of how hard it is to make, but because of how much history it holds. Eating it is like tasting memory itself. And if you think this is as light and poetic as food can get, just wait, because next up is a casserole that's just as seasonal but grounded in sunshine and soil. Zuni summer squash casserole. When it comes to summer eating, nothing hits the spot quite like Zuni summer squash casserole. This dish is warm weather on a plate. It starts with sliced squash, yellow, green, whatever you had from the garden, and layers it with sun-dried corn that has been rehydrated and roasted just enough to bring out its natural sweetness. Dixie Flavor is light, sweet, and kissed with a bit of smoke. This is not a cheesy, heavy casserole. This one breathes. The Zuni people have always known how to make the most of seasonal harvests, and this dish is no exception. You might throw in a handful of onions or a few herbs from the windowsill planter, but the real star is the simplicity. It's bright, it's honest, and it's proof that you don't need cream of anything soup to make a casserole worth remembering. But if you thought this dish was pure comfort, the next one is pure nostalgia. An old-school sweet made of trees and thyme, maple candy, long before candy bars were ever wrapped in shiny plastic, there was maple candy, one of the original sweet treats of the woodland tribes. This is the good stuff. We're talking boiled maple syrup poured into carved wooden molds or drizzled over fresh snow, left to cool until it hardened into amber perfection. The texture is somewhere between fudge and toffee, soft at first bite, but rich with flavor that lingers. No corn syrup, no additives, just sap and skill. Tribes like the Abenaki, Ojibwe, and Haudenosaunee knew exactly when to tap the trees. Early spring, when the nights were cold and the days started warming up, you'd collect the sap, then spend all day tending a fire, stirring, watching, and waiting. It was for special occasions, ceremonies, and storytelling nights. One bite and you were hooked. Now, if that has your sweet tooth wide awake, don't go anywhere. The next dish takes that sweetness and wraps it in the warm golden glow of autumn, inside a pumpkin, no less. Anishinaabe wild rice. Stuffed pumpkin. Imagine carving open a pumpkin not for Halloween, but for dinner. Anishinaabe wild rice stuffed pumpkin is exactly that. Autumn wrapped in a gourd. You start with a small pumpkin, scoop out the seeds, and roast it just enough to soften the flesh. Then comes the filling: cooked wild rice, sautéed onions, maybe some cranberries or diced mushrooms, and just enough seasoning to bring it all together. When it bakes, the rice soaks in the pumpkin sweetness, and the outer shell becomes this caramelized edible bowl. It's cozy, it's satisfying, and it's a dish that tells a seasonal story. Wild rice was sacred to the Anishinaabe people and other Great Lakes tribes, often harvested by canoe in shallow waters where it grew like grass. It was a food of celebration, community, and nourishment. And if you thought that was resourceful, the next recipe is going to take survival food to a whole new level. Get ready for the original indigenous energy bar made for warriors and wanderers, Wasnner. Plains tribes' energy food. Wasnner is what you packed when you had a long journey ahead and no room for excuses. This was the original energy bar made by the Plains tribes with dried bison meat, rendered fat, and berries, usually chokecherries or juneberries, pounded together into a dense, chewy blend that could last for weeks without spoiling. You could take it hunting, traveling, or straight into battle. It was high in protein, fat, and natural sugars, everything you needed to survive wrapped up in one bite. Some tribes added nuts, others flavored it with wild mint or crushed seeds. The Lakota called it Wasnner, but variations existed from Montana to Oklahoma. It was food for people on the move. This was survival food with soul, and if you thought fermentation was only for yogurt and hipsters, just wait until you hear about the next dish: a tangy corn porridge with roots deep in Florida swamps. Seminole Seolki. Seolki is the kind of dish that sneaks up on you. At first glance, it looks simple, just corn porridge, but one spoonful and you realize you're tasting something ancient, complex, and strangely addictive. The Seminole people in Florida made Seolki by boiling cracked corn until it softened, then letting it ferment slightly over time. That light tang, that's where the magic is. It gives the porridge a kick, almost like sourdough, but smoother. Traditionally, it was served warm and plain, but sometimes seasoned with salt and in later years sweetened just slightly with cane, syrup, or berries. It filled bellies during lean seasons and nourished the spirit on rainy days. It may not be flashy, but it's unforgettable once you've had it. And if you thought tangy porridge was the far end of the indigenous breakfast table, let me introduce you to a pancake that smells like the desert and tastes like toasted honey. Apache. Mesquite flour pancakes. Apache mesquite flour pancakes are like the Southwest in breakfast form. Mesquite flour isn't made from wheat or grain. It's ground from the seed pods of the mesquite tree, which grows wild across desert landscapes. Like it owns the place. And the flavor? It's sweet, almost like cinnamon and molasses had a baby, with a deep, nutty undertone. The Apache people used it in everything from flatbreads to cakes. But pancakes, that's where it truly shines. You mix it with a bit of water, maybe an egg, if you have one, and cook it slow on a griddle until it bubbles and browns. These were the kinds of meals you made when the land was dry and the stores were far. You worked with what nature gave you, and mesquite flour gave a lot. But if this was sweet, cozy comfort, the next dish is anything but, because we're diving into something smoky, savory, and shot through with wild game. Irakcoy smoked duck succotash. Succotash is one of those dishes that seems simple, just corn and beans, right? But the Irakcoy version turns that simplicity into a masterclass of flavor. You start with the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, sautéed together until they caramelize slightly. Then, here comes the twist. You add slices of smoked duck. That rich, smoky meat lifts the whole dish into something downright luxurious. The Irakcoy knew that corn and beans were great on their own, but when paired with duck that had been smoked over hickory or applewood, you get a flavor that wraps around your tongue and lingers long after the bite is gone. You'd bring this to big gatherings, feasts, or just make it to show someone you cared. This wasn't your side dish succotash. This was the main event, and if you thought duck was the boldest thing you could put in a stew, let me take you north, way north, to a soup made from fish heads and seaweed that will make you rethink everything. Tlingit, fish head soup, fish. Head soup might not be what you crave on a chilly night, but to the Tlingit people of Alaska, it was sacred. This dish is about respect. Respect for the ocean, for the fish, and for every part of what you catch. You don't throw the head away. You simmer it slow and steady until the broth is rich with fat and flavor. Add seaweed, harvested fresh from coastal rocks, some wild onions or kelp, and you've got a bowl of something bold, briny, and absolutely primal. The eyes, the cheeks, the bones, all of it was honored and eaten. It was believed that wasting any part of the fish disrespected the spirit of the animal. But beyond the symbolism, there's real flavor here. You sat around the pot and remembered your place in the cycle of life. Now, if that has you wide-eyed, just wait. We're heading south next for a dish so rare and real it might stop you in your tracks. Choctur roasted possum with sweet potatoes. Roasted possum with sweet potatoes is the kind of dish people whisper about, half in disbelief and half in awe. But for the Mississippi Choctur, this was a real and honest meal, one that used what the forest offered. No shame, no waste. Possum may not sound appetizing to modern ears, but back then it was game meat like any other. When prepared right, cleaned, marinated, slow roasted until the fat rendered and the skin crisped, it tasted like a cross between pork and dark chicken. The trick was pairing it with sweet potatoes, which grew wild and were easy to store through the winter. Roasted together, they made a dish that was surprisingly balanced, sweet, savory, hearty, and if you thought that was the strangest thing to come out of the Southwest, just hold on. We're about to top sweet potatoes with something bright pink and a little wild. Get ready for prickly pear syrup poured over fresh corn cakes. Prickly pear syrup and corn cakes. Prickly pear syrup is what happens when the desert decides to show off. This bright pink liquid looks like it belongs in a candy shop, but it comes straight from the cactus fruit of the American Southwest. Once you get past the spines, literally, it's a treasure. The syrup is made by scooping out the ripe fruit, boiling it down, straining it, and adding just enough sweetener to balance out the natural tang. Corn cakes, soft and hearty from stone-ground maize, soak up the syrup like a sponge. Every bite is bright, sweet, and satisfying without being heavy. This dish was often served during harvest celebrations when the cactus fruit was at its best. The colors alone are enough to make your day better, and the taste seals the deal. If you've never tried cactus for breakfast, you're missing out. But if you think syrup from a cactus is wild, just wait until you taste a porridge made from the seeds of pine trees. Yeah, really. And it's one of the coziest meals around. Great. Bison pine nut porridge. Pine nut porridge is the kind of breakfast that sticks with you, literally and figuratively. The great Bison tribes of Nevada and Utah knew how to work with what the land gave them. And pine nuts were gold. They would gather them in the fall, roast them, crack them open, and grind them into a rich, nutty flour. Mix that with water, heat it gently, and you've got pine nut porridge. Warm, smooth, and earthy. It's not too sweet. But if you toss in a handful of wild berries, currants, gooseberries, or even juniper, if you're feeling bold, it brightens up beautifully. The texture is somewhere between oatmeal and cream of wheat, but with a buttery finish that oats could never dream of. And if that was breakfast comfort at its finest, the next dish is pure elemental brilliance, a fish baked not in foil, but in skunk cabbage, the original slow cooker from the riverbanks. Pawnee skunk cabbage baked fish. When you hear skunk cabbage, you probably don't think dinner, but for the Pawnee people, it was a culinary tool, and a brilliant one at that. They used the giant leaves of skunk cabbage to wrap fresh-caught fish, sealing in moisture and flavor as it baked over coals. This method is ancient and genius. The fish, usually river-caught trout or perch, was stuffed with herbs, maybe a few wild onions or crushed berries, then tucked into the cabbage leaves and buried in the hot earth, covered with stones or ashes. Slow roasting this way made the fish unbelievably tender, infused with the green vegetal aroma of the leaves. And even though the name might turn heads, the taste always won people over. But if you're craving something more coastal, the next dish is about to wash in with the tide, an indigenous chowder that predates New England and brings the forest right into your bowl. Wanoaguog Chowder. Before the clam chowder we know today was ever poured into a bread bowl, there was Wanoaguog Chowder. This was the original, thick, hardy, and completely tied to land and sea. The Wampanoag people harvested quahogs, those big, sturdy, hard-shell clams, from coastal waters, chopped them up, and simmered them into a stew with corn, wild herbs, and sometimes squash or beans. There was no heavy cream. Instead, the broth came alive with the natural saltiness of the sea, mellowed by starchy corn and sharpened by native herbs like sweetgrass or sage, the kind of dish that brought people together and left no bowl unfinished. It's still made today, and when done right, it's every bit as comforting as the modern version, just without the butter overload. And if you think chowder is where ancient cooking ends, get ready. The next one is even older, sweet, slow-cooked, and pulled right from the root of a wildflower that helped feed entire civilizations. Nez Perce camas root mash. Camas root mash is one of those foods you can almost hear when you taste it, slow, warm, and humming with history. The Nez Perce people, along with many plateau tribes, harvested camas bulbs every spring from open meadows. They looked a bit like onions, but tasted like something else entirely, sweet, nutty, and rich when cooked low and slow. And slow was the key. Camas root had to be baked in an underground pit for up to 2 days, a technique that transformed its starches into sugars. Once soft, it was mashed into a thick, fragrant paste, often eaten plain or shaped into patties and dried for travel, filling enough to be a meal. It was one of the great gifts of the land, and it still holds a powerful place in traditional diets and ceremonies. If mashed potatoes ever got a spiritual upgrade, this would be it. And speaking of rustic upgrades, the next dish is a skillet classic, straight from the woodlands. Corn, jerky, and a whole lot of heart. Navajo Fry Bread. When Native Americans created fry bread, they demonstrated their creativity and perseverance in the face of oppressive hardships. The limited rations provided by the government, white flour, sugar, and lard, crafted a food that would become an integral part of their culture. The origin of fry bread is linked to the Navajo Long Walk of 1864, when they were forcibly relocated from their traditional lands. Given unfamiliar government rations of white wheat flour, salt, and lard, they created fry bread out of necessity to survive. You eat it alone, dusted with sugar, drizzled with honey, or as the base for a hearty Indian taco. Fry bread tells a powerful story of survival and adaptability. Puffs up when it hits the hot oil, creating a golden disc that's crispy on the outside, soft and slightly chewy inside. It's become a symbol of Native American resilience and is now found at powwows, tribal gatherings, and indigenous celebrations from coast to coast. This humble bread so powerful isn't just its taste, though that's certainly part of it. History it represents. Tragedy came something that nourishes not just the body, but the connection to heritage and community. Creek deer hash. Sometimes a skillet and a fire are all you need to make something unforgettable. Corn and deer jerky skillet hash was just that. A humble meal with a whole lot of power behind it. In the forests of Arkansas and Louisiana, this dish made the most of preserved venison. Deer jerky was tough, sure, but once you chopped it up and cooked it low and slow with corn, onions, and a bit of wild garlic or herbs, it softened into something rich and savory. It was often roasted first, adding a smoky edge that turned simple ingredients into something heartwarming. This dish filled stomachs and told stories at the same time. And if you thought skillet cooking was rustic, wait until we head even further into the plains, where buffalo bones, not just the meat, took center stage in a soup that was more medicine than meal. Mandan buffalo bone soup. Buffalo bone soup might sound like a desperate last resort, but for the Mandan people, it was a carefully crafted, nutrient-rich tradition. When you're working with limited resources, nothing goes to waste, not even the bones. Prime cuts of meat were used up. The bones were roasted and simmered for hours, sometimes days, until they released every last bit of marrow and collagen into the pot. It was slow food before slow food had a name. It warmed the body, healed the joints, and kept you full well into the next day. Because bones were available long after the meat was gone, this was also a survival dish. Around fires when times were lean, but spirits stayed high. Thought broth was where the plains stopped showing off. Think again. Up next is a snack that crunches like a granola bar and has roots deeper than any supermarket shelf. Hidatsa sunflower seed cakes. Flower seed cakes were the original energy bar. The Hidatsa people knew how to get serious nutrition into a small portable bite, and this was their answer. Roasted sunflower seeds, native to the plains and cultivated with care. Them down and mix them with dried berries, maybe a little honey or mashed root if you had it. Shape them into small cakes and dry them in the sun or by the fire. And crisp, chewy, and sweet all at once. Cakes were carried on journeys, eaten during planting seasons, or handed out to kids as snacks that didn't come in foil wrappers. And it was a tradition that travelled well. Speaking of travelling, The next stop on our indigenous culinary journey takes us to the Northern California coast, where one slippery, smoky fish changed everything about dinner. Yurok smoked eel. Eel is not for the faint of heart, but for the Yurok people of Northern California, it was a delicacy worth the catch. These slippery river eels were abundant and full of fat, which made them ideal for smoking. After cleaning and seasoning them, often with salt, seaweed, and pine smoke, they were hung above smouldering alderwood fires and left to cure. Flavored silky meat with a smoky tang that went straight to your bones. Pair that with wild greens, things like fiddleheads, miner's lettuce, or sea rocket, and you had a plate that was rich, bold, and nourishing. The greens were often sautéed lightly or served raw with vinegar and herbs, their sharpness cutting through the richness of the eel. Thought smoked eel was as coastal as it gets. Wait until you dip into the Arctic waters, where seals, snow and seaside greens come together in a dish colder than ice but rich enough to warm you from the inside out. Beach greens and seal fat dip. Beach greens and seal fat dip is one of those dishes that challenges everything you think you know about food. Cold, coastal, and full of fat. A good way. The people of southern Alaska made this from what they had access to in their unforgiving environment. Seal fat was rendered down until creamy and smooth, almost like butter, then mixed with chopped greens harvested from the shore, things like goose tongue, sea lettuce, and beach lovage. The salt from the sea, the bite of the greens, and the richness of the fat created a balance that's hard to explain and impossible to forget. It was spread over dried fish, used as a dip for root vegetables, or even eaten on its own in small bites. This was survival food that tasted like celebration, and if that cold breeze off the Arctic put a chill in your bones, don't worry. We're heading inland next to the warmth of fry bread and berries so thick they'll leave a stain on your heart if one of these dishes brought back a memory or made you curious to try something new. Let us know your favorite in the comments below. If you enjoyed this culinary journey through Native American traditions, hit that like button to honor these recipes and subscribe so we can keep cooking up history together. Next time, remember, these aren't just recipes, they're stories, survival, and soul on a plate.